Commander Lee Ji-ho had been staring at the same blank screen for 3 hours. The quantum communicator sat silent on his desk, collecting dust like an expensive paperweight. 18 long months had passed since the Zelfani Confederacy had basically told humanity to get lost and never come back. The memory still stung. He remembered that day clearly. The Zelfani ambassador had taken one look at the diplomatic dinner Earth had prepared and nearly fainted. Apparently, serving grilled chicken to a species of strict herbivores was considered a war crime. They called humans savage Deathworlders and banned them from entering any civilized space. The insult had echoed across every human colony for months. But now, something was different. The communicator was beeping. Ji-ho leaned forward, hardly believing his eyes. After a year and a half of complete radio silence, the device was actually receiving a signal. His heart started beating faster as he activated the receiver, expecting maybe a formal apology or perhaps a trade offer. What he heard instead made his blood run cold. The voice that came through was weak, broken, filled with static and terror. Please, anyone who can hear this. The Vanguard has taken our worlds. Our children are dying. We need help. Anyone, please. The transmission kept repeating, growing weaker each time. Ji-ho sat frozen for a moment, trying to process what he was hearing. These were the same beings who had called humans monsters. Same species that wouldn't even touch human hands because they thought we were too violent and dirty to exist. In their perfect society, Lieutenant Park Minji looked up from her station across the bridge. She was young, maybe 25, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Sir, I'm tracking the source of that signal. You're not going to believe this, but it's coming from the Zelthani homeworld. Ji-ho let out a laugh, but there was no humor in it. You mean the planet belonging to the species that thinks we're too savage to breathe the same air as them? The very same, sir? Park's expression was a mix of confusion and dark amusement. Apparently, civilized herbivores who banned us from their space because we eat meat are now begging the barbarians for help. The irony was almost too perfect. For months, human colonies had dealt with the shame of being rejected by the galaxy's so-called peacekeepers. Earth's children had grown up hearing that they were too violent, too primitive, too dangerous for polite galactic society. And now those same aliens were crying for help, but the word children in that desperate message kept echoing in Ji-ho's mind. Whatever was happening to the Zelthani, kids were involved. That changed everything. What's this Vanguard they're talking about? He asked, turning to his science officer. Dr. Kim Soo-yang was already pulling up data on the main screen. She was brilliant. The kind of person who could solve puzzles that made other scientists give up. Her fingers danced across the controls, bringing up star maps and energy readings from across the sector. I've never heard of them before, but look at this, she said, pointing to the holographic display. Our long-range sensors are picking up massive energy signatures moving through Confederacy space. Whatever these Vanguard are, they're not just passing through, they're destroying everything in their path. The display showed a trail of devastation cutting through what used to be peaceful Zelthani territory. Entire star systems were going dark, their signals simply stopping. It was systematic, methodical, and absolutely terrifying. Ji-ho felt something cold settle in his stomach. It was the same feeling he'd had years ago when his 8-year-old daughter, Minseo, had come home from school crying because older kids were picking on her. The same feeling when news reports showed floods threatening his hometown while he was away on deployment. The same feeling when the Zelthani had rejected humanity and made them outcasts in their own galaxy. It was the feeling that always came before he made his most dangerous decisions, sir, Park said carefully. I have to ask, are we really going to help them? After everything they said about us? After they made it clear we're not welcome anywhere in civilized space? Ji-ho was quiet for a long moment, listening to the desperate transmission still playing in the background. He thought about his daughter, now grown up and serving on a colony ship. He thought about all the human children who had been told they were monsters. He thought about the Zelthani younglings mentioned in that broken plea for help. You know what the difference is between us and them? He finally said. They think being civilized means being safe and clean and never getting your hands dirty. We think being civilized means protecting people who can't protect themselves, even if they hate you for it. Stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, children were in danger. It didn't matter what species they were or what their parents had said about humans. They were kids, and they needed help. Set course for Zelthany space, he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that would change everything. And send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we're responding to a humanitarian crisis. Park hesitated. Sir, entering. Their space without permission could be seen as an act of war, especially after what happened before. Chiko turned back to his crew, and his expression was one they'd seen before. It was the look he got when someone threatened something he cared about. It was the look that had earned him 3 medals and a reputation as someone you definitely didn't want as an enemy. Lieutenant, when someone calls for help, humans answer. Even if they've spent the last year and a half telling the entire galaxy that we're too dangerous to exist. He walked back to his command chair and sat down. Besides, I'm curious to see what could possibly scare a species that considers us violent monsters. The ship's engines hummed to life, and the stars began to shift as they changed course. None of them knew it yet, but they were about to discover that sometimes the monsters were exactly what the galaxy needed. The moment the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, everyone on the bridge knew they were looking at hell. Commander Lee Ji-ho had seen war zones before, had witnessed the aftermath of pirate raids and colonial uprisings. But nothing had prepared him for this. The Zelthany system had once been famous throughout the galaxy as a masterpiece of peaceful civilization. Orbital cities had floated around their homeworld like delicate crystal sculptures, each one a work of art that housed millions of beings. The planet below had been a garden paradise, with flowing cities that blended seamlessly into forests and meadows. Travel documentaries used to feature this place as proof that some species had evolved beyond the need for violence. Now it looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to a museum, where those beautiful orbital stations had once gleamed like jewels. Catching starlight, there were only twisted chunks of metal spinning slowly through space. Debris fields stretched for thousands of kilometers, filled with the broken pieces of what had once been home to countless families. Some of the wreckage was still glowing from fires that had been burning for days. Dr. Kim Soo-yang was the first to break the shocked silence on the bridge. She was staring at her scanner readings with the kind of expression people get when they witness a car accident. Jesus Christ, she whispered, her normally steady voice shaking. Population readings are down by 70%. 70%. Ji-ho, let that number sink in. The Zelthany homeworld had been home to nearly 2 billion beings just a week ago. Now, according to their sensors, fewer than 600 million were still alive. The scale of destruction was almost impossible to comprehend. Lieutenant. Park Minji was running damage assessments on her tactical display, her young face tight with concentration and horror. Sir, I'm reading impact craters across 3 continents. Whatever hit them used weapons I've never seen before. The energy signatures are completely unknown. Ji-ho felt his jaw clench so hard his teeth ached. The Zelthany had been annoying, sure. They'd been self-righteous and condescending and had treated humanity like a disease that needed to be quarantined. But they had been peaceful, at their worst. Crime was thinking they were better than everyone else. They grew flowers and wrote poetry and had never hurt anyone in their entire recorded history. They hadn't deserved this. Sir Park called out, her voice cutting through his dark thoughts. We're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. The signal is weak, but I think it's Ambassador Veith. Ji-ho remembered Veith clearly. Zelthany diplomat had been the picture of elegant superiority 18 months ago. With silver fur that seemed to shimmer in any light, and those large, expressive eyes that had looked at humans like they were something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of a shoe, Veith had been the one to officially declare humanity too savage for civilized space. The main screen flickered to life, and Ji-ho barely recognized the creature looking back at him. This wasn't the proud, pristine being who had dismissed humanity with such casual arrogance. Veith's beautiful silver fur was matted and stained with something dark that might have been blood. Those expressive eyes were hollow, haunted by things no peaceful species should ever have to see. The elegant robes that had once marked Veith's diplomatic status were torn and dirty. But somehow, possibly, Veith's dignity remained intact. "Commander Lee," the ambassador began, and despite everything, their voice still carried that musical quality that made Zelthany's speech sound like singing. I must apologize for our previous treatment of your species." "We were wrong to save it," Jiho interrupted, though his tone wasn't harsh. "There would be time for apologies later, if any of them survived what was coming. Here, what's the vanguard?" Veith's large eyes closed for a moment, as if gathering strength to speak about something too terrible to remember. When they opened again, there was a kind of broken resolve there. "They call themselves the Perfected," Vith said, and the name seemed to leave a bad taste in their mouth. "They appeared in our outer systems 6 days ago. We thought they were explorers, maybe traders. We sent diplomatic envoys to welcome them." The ambassador's voice cracked slightly. "They sent our envoys back to us in pieces, along with a message. They said we were ... inefficient. Biological waste that needed to be processed." Dr. Kim leaned forward from her station. "Processed how?" "They're not just conquering worlds, Commander. They're harvesting them. Taking everything living and converting it into something else. Something mechanical. Something without souls." Veith's voice was barely above a whisper now. "They're taking the children first, our younglings. Converting them into extensions of their collective mind." The word children hit Jiho like a physical blow. He felt something cold and sharp crystallize in his chest. The same feeling he'd had when he learned that pirates had taken his sister's colony ship 20 years ago. It was a feeling that had once led to him earning a reputation that made career. Criminals crossed to the other side of the street when they saw him coming. "How many?" he asked quietly. 30,000 of our younglings," Veth said, and the numbers seemed to physically pain them to speak. "They've taken them to a processing ship. They're heading for a launch point at the edge of our system." "How long until they reach it?" 18 hours, maybe less." "But Commander, I must warn you." Veth looked directly at him through the screen. "Your single ship, no matter how advanced, cannot stand against what destroyed our entire defense." Fleet Jiho was quiet for a moment, then he started to smile. It wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the kind of smile that had made enemy commanders surrender rather than find out what he was capable of when he was truly angry. "Who said anything about a single ship?" he asked cheerfully. Vith actually flinched at that smile, some instinct, warning them that they were looking at something far more dangerous than they'd realized. "Park, signal the fleet," Jiho commanded. "Atlas, decloak the task force." The space around the Prometheus began to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Reality seemed to bend and twist, and suddenly, the emptiness around them wasn't empty anymore. 17 warships materialized out of nothing, their hulls sleek and predatory and bristling with weapons that had never been seen in this part of the galaxy. They were beautiful and terrible at the same time, like mechanical sharks that had evolved in the depths of space. Ambassador Veith's eyes went wide with something that might have been fear, might have been awe, might have been both. "Surprise," Jiho said, his tone conversational and absolutely terrifying. "Did you really think we'd come to former enemy space with just one ship? We're Deathworlders, Ambassador. We're not stupid."
Ow.
The truth was, every human ship that entered, potentially. Hostile space carried escorts. It was a lesson learned in blood during the early colonial wars. But these weren't just any escorts. These were the ships that Earth sent when they expected serious trouble. And 30,000 kidnapped children definitely counted as serious trouble. The Vanguard processing ship, Eternal Purpose, was a nightmare made real. 3 kilometers of twisted metal and organic tissue fused together in ways that defied both engineering and biology. It moved through space like a gigantic predator, its hull pulsing with veins that carried some kind of fluid between mechanical components and living tissue. Inside this floating horror, thousands of converted beings moved through the corridors with mechanical precision. They had once been individuals from dozens of different species, each with their own thoughts, dreams, and personalities. Now they were all part of something called the Collective, their minds linked together in a network that had erased everything that made them unique. Deep in the ship's control center, Primary Overseer Zixneen watched the conversion process with cold satisfaction. He had once been a brilliant scientist from the Andromedan hegemony, a being who had dedicated his life to helping others. That was before the Vanguard had perfected him, replacing half his brain with cybernetic implants and connecting him to their hive mind. Now he felt nothing but mechanical efficiency as he monitored the processing chambers, where 30,000 Zelthani children were being slowly transformed into extensions of the collective's will. The younglings were strapped, two tables that looked more like surgical equipment mixed with factory assembly lines. Robotic arms moved with precise, inhuman movements, installing cybernetic implants behind their large eyes and replacing sections of their nervous systems with mechanical alternatives. The children's natural telepathic abilities made them perfect candidates for conversion. Once they were fully processed, they would become living sensors for the collective ZYX-9. Had overseen thousands of these conversions across 17 different star systems. It had become routine, as mechanical and emotionless as breathing. The screaming always stopped after the first neural implant was installed. Overseer came a voice from one of his subordinates, another converted being whose original species was impossible to determine. Long-range sensors are detecting incoming vessels. Configuration unknown. Zixneen's augmented eyes, now more camera than organic tissue, focused on the tactical display. 17 ships were approaching in a formation he didn't recognize. They moved like predators, not like the peaceful merchant vessels, or lightly armed patrol ships the Confederacy usually sent. Analysis, he commanded, his voice carrying the hollow echo that all perfected developed after conversion. Energy signatures indicate advanced weaponry, possibly military grade. Whole configurations suggest they're built for combat, not exploration. However, they appear to be from a species not in our databases. That was unusual. The Vanguard had detailed records on every known spacefaring species in this part of the galaxy. They had spent decades studying their targets before beginning the Great Perfection. Unknown vessels suggested either a very isolated species or one that had been deliberately keeping secrets. No matter, Zixneen decided. Unknown species simply means more biological material for processing. Signal them. Offer them one chance to withdraw before we demonstrate the futility of resistance. The communication array crackled to life, broadcasting on standard galactic frequencies. Within moments, a response came back. Zixneen immediately knew these beings were different from anything they'd encountered before. The voice that answered was completely organic, unmodified by cybernetic enhancement. Worse, it was full of what the perfected had learned to recognize as chaotic emotions: anger, determination, and something else that seemed almost protective. Vanguard vessel. This is Commander Lee Jiho of the Terran Defense Force. You are currently in possession of 30,000 kidnapped children. You have 1 minute to release them before we take them back. Zixneen actually laughed, a sound like grinding metal gears. The absurdity of it was almost amusing. These Terrans thought they could make demands of the perfected. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Another inferior species come to die for the Zelthani? He replied, his voice carrying across space with mechanical precision. How touching. We are the perfected children. We have conquered 17 sectors and processed billions of biological entities. Your pathetic fleet will join our collective, and your young will be improved beyond your primitive comprehension. There was a pause on the other end of the communication. Zixneen expected begging, or maybe desperate attempts at negotiation. Most species tried to bargain when they realized what they were facing. Some offered tribute, others promised to serve, voluntarily if their children were spared. Instead, the human's voice came back, and somehow it was infinitely worse than before. It was calm, controlled, almost conversational. But underneath that friendly tone was something that made even Zixneen's heavily modified nervous system send warning signals to his brain. Here's the thing about humans, Commander Jiho said, as if he were explaining something to a particularly slow student. We have this concept called proportional response. You threaten us, we threaten you back. You attack us, we attack you. back with equal force. It's civilized. It's reasonable. It keeps conflicts from getting out of hand. Zixneen was about to interrupt with another threat when the human continued. But you. The voice dropped to almost a whisper, but somehow it carried. More menace than any shout. You took children. You hurt children. You're about to learn what disproportionate response means. Through the processing ship's advanced sensor array, Zixneen watched something that should have been impossible. The human fleet was beginning to glow with energy signatures that made his instruments scream warnings about power levels that defied known physics. Impossible, he breathed, his mechanical voice box struggling to process what he was seeing. Those energy readings should tear their ships apart from the inside. The ships weren't just powering up weapons, they were doing something to the space around them. The quantum foam that made up the fabric of reality was bending, twisting, as if the humans had found a way to turn physics itself into a weapon. Overseer called his tactical officer, genuine fear creeping into its synthesized voice. Those vessels are generating energy levels equivalent to stellar phenomena. They're using their own structural integrity as part of their weapon systems. It's like they're channeling the power of their ship's reactor directly through their hull. Zixneen stared at the readings in growing alarm. In all their conquests, the Vanguard had never encountered anything like this.
Ow.
Most species built their ships to survive in space. These humans seem to have built their ships to weaponize space itself. Commander Jaho's voice came through the communication array one final time, carrying a tone that somehow managed to be both cheerful and absolutely terrifying. Welcome to Deathworlder engineering, he said, as if sharing a favorite recipe. See, most species build their ships to survive in normal space, to work within the natural laws of physics. But we come from a world that spent 4 billion years trying to kill us with earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, and ice ages. The human ships were glowing brighter now, space around them rippling like water. We don't build our ships to survive in normal space, Jiho continued conversationally. We build them to turn normal space into a weapon. And you just gave us a very good reason to show you what happens when you make a Deathworlder angry. The first time in decades, since before his conversion, Zixneen felt something that the Perfected had programmed out of their collective consciousness. Fear when the human fleet opened fire. The universe itself seemed to scream. The first salvo hit. The eternal purpose like nothing Zixneen had ever experienced in decades of conquest. Instead of the familiar sight of energy beams or kinetic projectiles that he'd grown accustomed to during the Vanguard's expansion, something far more terrifying struck their shields, the protective barriers around the massive processing. Ship didn't just absorb the attack or deflect it. They began to twist and bend in ways that hurt to look at. Space itself was being warped around the impact points, creating distortions that made reality look like a funhouse mirror. The shields flickered between colors that didn't have names, shifting through spectrums that organic eyes weren't designed to see, the entire 3-kilometer. Ship shuddered like a wounded animal. Lights flickered throughout the biomechanical corridors as systems that had never failed before suddenly found themselves dealing with forces that shouldn't exist. Report, Zixneen demanded, his mechanical voice carrying an edge of something that might have been panic if he'd still been capable of such emotions. One of his converted officers, a being whose original species had been wiped from memory during the perfection process, turned from its station with movements that were less precise than usual. Shields holding at 60% overseer, but the weapon signatures, they're not following standard physics. That was impossible. The Vanguard had studied the physics of warfare across 17 different star systems. They had encountered every known type of weapon, from primitive chemical explosives to advanced antimatter disruptors. Their shields were designed to handle anything the galaxy could throw at them, but these humans weren't throwing conventional weapons at them. They were somehow using their own ships as weapons, channeling energies through their hulls that should have melted the vessels from the inside out. The readings on his instrument showed power levels that defied every known law of engineering. How are their ships still intact? Zixneen asked, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. Those energy levels should have vaporized them moment they tried to channel that much power through their systems. Unknown, Overseer. It appears they've built their vessels to withstand forces that would destroy any other known ship design. They're using their own structural integrity as part of their weapon system. A69 felt something cold settling in what remained of his organic brain. These weren't just advanced weapons. This was a completely different approach to warfare. Most species built their ships to survive in space, to protect their crews from the hostile environment of the void. These humans seem to have built their ships to turn space itself into a weapon. "Return fire," he commanded, his voice echoing through the command center. "All batteries. Show them the power of the perfected, eternal purpose unleashed hell." Plasma cannons that could melt through planetary crusts opened fire in perfect synchronization. Antimatter torpedoes that had cracked moons in half streaked through space toward the human fleet. Gravitational disruptors that could tear apart the molecular bonds of any known material focused their reality-bending power on the lead human vessel. It was a barrage that had reduced entire defense fleets to glowing particles. The combined firepower of the Vanguard's most advanced weapon systems converged on a single point in space, where the human flagship floated defiantly and bounced off. The weapons didn't just fail to penetrate the human ship's defenses. They seemed to be absorbed, their energy somehow redirected back into the vessel's own systems. The human ship actually began to glow brighter as it fed on the Vanguard's attacks. "Impossible," Zixneen breathed, his mechanical voice box struggling to process what he was seeing. "Overseer," came a panicked report from his tactical station. "Their defensive systems are adaptive. They're not just deflecting our weapons, they're absorbing the energy and redirecting it back into their own power systems. It's like they're feeding on our attacks." Through the sensor feeds, Zixneen watched as the human ship that had taken the brunt of their assault began to charge its weapons to even higher levels. The vessel was using their own firepower against them, turning the Vanguard's strength into fuel for an even more devastating counterattack. "Commander," Poe's voice filled the command center again, but now it carried an undertone that made even the cybernetically enhanced Vanguard officers unconsciously stepped back from their stations. "That was your free shot," he said, his tone conversational and absolutely terrifying. "Hope you enjoyed it, because now it's our turn." There was a pause that seemed to stretch for eternity. Then Jiho's voice came again, speaking to someone else on his ship. "Atlas, initiate the Prometheus Protocol." Zixneen had approximately 3 seconds to wonder what a Prometheus Protocol might be before the human fleet began to do something that defied every law of physics he thought he understood. The 17 ships started to move, but not in any formation he'd ever seen. They were positioning themselves in a complex, three-dimensional pattern. Streams of energy beginning to flow between them like glowing bridges. Their individual power signatures were merging, combining into something that made his sensors scream warnings about impossible energy levels. "They're linking their ships together," his tactical officer reported. Its synthesized voice carrying genuine fear for the first time since its conversion. "All 17 vessels are becoming part of a single weapon system. Combined energy output is ... Overseer. The readings are off the scale." Zixneen stared at the display in growing horror. The humans weren't just attacking with 17 ships. They were turning their entire fleet into one massive weapon. The energy readings were showing power levels equivalent to stellar phenomena, as if they'd found a way to harness the power of a star and focus it into a single beam. "They're turning their entire fleet into a single weapon," breathed his tactical officer. "Sir, I strongly recommend immediate retreat. Our shields cannot withstand that level of concentrated firepower." Zixneen was no longer listening. Through the biomechanical neural network that connected all perfected, he could feel something he hadn't experienced since before his conversion. It was pure, primal terror at the sight of a predator that had just revealed its true nature. Human fleet fired as one, and reality shattered. The beam that lanced out from the combined vessels wasn't just energy, it was weaponized physics itself. It was a concentrated blast of the same forces that had forged planets in stellar fire and shaped galaxies through cosmic violence. When it struck the eternal purpose S shields, it didn't just overwhelm them, it erased them from existence. "Pull! Breach on all decks," screamed his tactical officer, its voice rising to a pitch that would have been panic in an organic being. structural integrity failing across all sections. Emergency barriers are not responding. The 3-kilometer processing. Ship began to split apart like a flower blooming in reverse. The biomechanical hull that had withstood the firepower of entire defense fleets cracked open, exposing the interior chambers to the vacuum of space. Emergency systems that had never failed before simply couldn't cope with damage on this scale. Alarms blared throughout the dying ship as atmosphere rushed out through massive breaches in the hull. The conversion chambers, where 30,000 Zelthani children had been held, were suddenly opened to space, their occupants protected only by emergency force fields that were failing one by one. "Commander," Giho's voice came through the communication. System one final time, somehow managing to be both gentle and more terrifying than any threat Zixnine had ever heard. "This is your last chance, X9," he said, his tone almost conversational. "Release the children, and we'll make your death quick. Keep them, and we'll show you what happens when you threaten something a human loves." For the first time in decades, Zixnine understood what the Zelthani had meant when they called humans savage Deathworlders. These weren't just advanced weapons or superior technology. This was something far more dangerous, a species that had learned to weaponize their own protective instincts, and they had just made the mistake of threatening their young. The rescue operation that followed was something Commander Li Jiho would remember for the rest of his life. 6 hours of carefully coordinated chaos as human rescue teams moved through the wreckage of what had once been the most feared ship in Vanguard space. The Eternal Purpose no longer existed as a functional vessel. Where a 3-kilometer processing ship had once drifted through space like a mechanical nightmare, now there was only a glowing debris field. Chunks of biomechanical hull tumbled slowly through the void, their surfaces still radiating heat from the devastating attack that had torn the ship apart. But somehow, human weapons had been precise in ways that defied belief. The devastating beam that had shattered the Vanguard ship had carefully avoided the processing chambers, leaving intact pockets of atmosphere where 30,000 younglings waded in. Terror. It was as if the humans had performed surgery on a molecular level, removing the cancer while leaving the patient alive. Jiho stood in the main cargo bay of the Prometheus, watching his medical teams work with a gentleness that would have surprised anyone who had witnessed the fury of their attack just hours before. These same hands that had operated weapons capable of cracking planets were now carefully removing cybernetic implants from traumatized children. Dr. Kim Su-Yang moved among the rescued younglings like a guardian angel. Her scanner showed readings that made Jiho's heart lift with relief. The neural damage was minimal. The Vanguard had taken these children early in their conversion process, before the worst of the cybernetic integration could take place. Most of them would recover completely, with nothing but bad dreams to remind them of their ordeal. The Zelthani children huddled together in small groups, their large eyes still wide with fear, but beginning to show signs of hope. Human crew members sat with them, offering food that was actually suitable for herbivores this time, soft blankets, and small toys that had been hastily replicated from the ship's fabricators. Lieutenant Park Mingi approached Jiho with a smile. That made her look even younger than her 25 years. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Zelthani homeworld. It's Ambassador Veeth, and judging by the background noise, I think the entire planet wants to talk to you." The main screen flickered to life, revealing a scene that was the complete opposite of the devastation they had witnessed just days before. Ambassador Veeth stood in what appeared to be the center of a massive celebration. Behind the diplomat, Jiho could see crowds of Zelthani embracing each other, their musical voices raised in harmonious songs of joy and relief. Veeth looked different now. The haunted expression was gone, replaced by something Jiho had never seen in a Zelthani before, genuine warmth directed at a human being. Commander Lee Veeth began, their voice thick with emotion that made their words even more musical than usual. There are no words in any language for what you have done. 30,000 children, saved from a fate worse than death. You came to help us even after we... The ambassador paused, their large eyes glistening with what might have been tears. "Even after we called you monsters." Even after we rejected your species and banned you from civilized space? Came anyway. Jiho smiled, but it was a tired expression. The adrenaline of battle was wearing off, leaving behind the exhaustion that always came after operations like this. Monsters, maybe. But we're your monsters now, Ambassador. That's what humans do. We adopt people whether they want us to. Or not. Behind him, he could hear soft laughter as one of his crew members played some kind of simple game with a group of Zelthani younglings. The sound made something warm settle in his chest. I need to ask you something, Veth continued, their voice becoming more hesitant. What you did to the Vanguard ship, that level of destructive power. The way you turned space itself into a weapon. Are we right to be afraid of you? Jiho considered the question carefully. It was a fair one, and it deserved an honest answer. Behind him, he could see his crew members sitting with frightened children, offering comfort and safety with the same hands that had just operated some of the most destructive weapons in the galaxy. Yes, he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of absolute honesty. You should be afraid of us. We're the species that evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. We come from a planet of earthquakes and volcanoes and ice ages and predators that saw us as food. Veeth's expression grew increasingly worried as Jiho continued. We carry the power to crack planets in our ships and the knowledge to end entire civilizations in our computers. We've weaponized physics itself and turned our own bodies into tools. For survival. When we get angry, we can do things that would give nightmares to species that have never known real violence. The ambassador looked like they were beginning to regret asking the question, but Jiho wasn't finished. But here's the thing about humans, Ambassador. We don't use that power on our friends. We use it on the things that threaten our friends. And as of today, whether you like it or not, the Zelthani Confederacy is under human protection. He gestured to the children playing in the cargo bay, their laughter echoing through the vast space-like music. You called us Deathworlders, and you were absolutely right. We come from a world of death, and we carry that death with us wherever we go. But we also carry something else. The absolute, unshakable belief that children should be safe, that the innocent should be protected, and that anyone who threatens them will face everything that 4 billion years of evolution built us to. Jiho leaned back in his command chair, his expression softening as he watched a human engineer teach a group of Zelthani younglings how to make paper airplanes. So yes, Ambassador, be afraid of us. Be very afraid. Just make sure you're more afraid of the things we're afraid of. Because if something scares a human badly enough to call for help, it's probably something that deserves to meet a species that learned to be monsters so that others don't have to be. The transmission ended, and the screen went dark. In the distance, Jiho could see the rest of the human fleet forming up for the journey home. Their hulls still glowing with residual energy from the battle. They looked like mechanical angels, beautiful and terrible, and absolutely committed to their self-appointed role as protectors. A soft chime from the ship's AI interrupted his thoughts. Atlas spoke in the calm, measured tones that had guided humanity through countless crises. Commander, I've finished analyzing the data we recovered from the Vanguard's database. There are more processing ships out there, more children in danger. 17 other vessels scattered across 12 different star systems. Jiho felt that familiar weight settle in his stomach again. It was the same feeling that had started this whole adventure, the same protective instinct that had driven humanity to answer a desperate call for help from people who had rejected them. His smile was sharp and bright and full of terrible promise. Then I guess we'd better get back to work, he said, standing up from his command chair. Set course for the next target and signaled the fleet. Tell them we're going hunting. 17 human warships turned toward the darkness between stars, their weapons charged and their crews ready. They carried with them something that the galaxy had never seen before, the love of a species that had learned to be the monsters. Under the bed, so that the innocent could sleep safely, the Vanguard had made their biggest mistake when they decided to threaten children. Now they were about to learn what happened when you made enemies of the most protective species in the galaxy. The hunt had begun.